Hello and welcome to day 2 of our Easter devotions where we're thinking about Jesus' sayings on the cross. Today we come to the second saying of Jesus on the cross. And this is the saying that Jesus speaks to one of the criminals who was crucified with him. You can read the full story in Luke chapter 23 verses 39 to 43. We're not going to read it now for sake of time, but that's Luke 23, 39 to 43 if you want to check it out. Here, this saying comes in the context of Jesus having a conversation with some of the criminals who he was crucified alongside. The fact that Jesus was crucified with criminals is significant for lots of reasons, but not least because it fulfills a prophecy from Isaiah 53. We've been spending the weeks leading up to Easter and our midweeks thinking about Isaiah 53, and we haven't even been able to plumb the depths of that brilliant chapter. But just last week, we read the words that the servant of the Lord would be numbered with the transgressors in his death. 700 years before the crucifixion, Isaiah prophesied that this would happen. This was no surprise, no product of luck, not some chance. This encounter between Jesus and the man on the cross was part of God's great redemptive plan. This was a moment planned by God. The cross didn't take Jesus or God by surprise. It was part of his plan from eternity, promised in the Old Testament, fulfilled in the New. So in this saying of Jesus on the cross, we're first of all reminded of God's sovereignty and salvation, that God is in control over all things. But it's also a reminder, kind of like we thought about yesterday, that no one's beyond the grace of God. You know, this criminal hanging on the cross had nothing to commend himself to God. And it reminds us that salvation is all of grace and not of works. This criminal had no opportunity to earn God's favour in any way, and yet salvation is bestowed on him as a beautiful gift of grace. Isn't that a wonderful truth in the gospel, that there's nothing we can do to earn God's love, that it is an act of grace? And we see that beauty and grace in how Jesus embraces and accepts this sinner, this criminal on the cross. And it reminds us, like we were thinking yesterday, that we should see no one as beyond the grace of God. We should see no one as beyond the limit of our prayers. We are to persist in prayer for the salvation of the most unlikely people in our lives. Don't give up for those people who you think just couldn't come to faith. Remember the thief on the cross, that salvation is ultimately all of grace, and we cannot determine God's hand in this, but we simply pray and share and trust in God to draw them to himself. But for a couple of moments this morning, I want us to consider Jesus' response really to the criminal's call for mercy. The criminal asked Jesus to remember him when he comes into his kingdom. And this in itself is a really remarkable confession of faith. The criminal, the thief, recognizes who Jesus is. He calls him Lord. He places his trust and his faith firmly in him through this prayer for deliverance. The grace of God has revealed these things to the criminal, and he calls out to Jesus, Lord, remember me when you come in to your kingdom. And then Jesus makes this wonderful promise to him. He says, today you will be with me in paradise. And on the face of it, this is a really simple promise. We could paraphrase it as simply, you're going to be in heaven. And often that's what we think of as Christians. When we die, we're going to heaven. And that's true. But actually, when we read that phrase of Jesus slowly, whenever we consider it carefully, we realise that it contains wonderful truths and wonderful promises for all who trust in Jesus. That today you will be with me in paradise. The promise is this, that for all who trust in Jesus, when we die, we can be sure that we will be with him forever. Jesus tells the criminal that today you will join me in paradise. The Apostle Paul says that for those who trust in Jesus, it's like it's absent from the body to be present with the Lord. As someone has said to me, we close our eyes in this world only to open them in the next with Jesus. That's the hope and promise for all who trust in Jesus. We go instantly to be with him. And where do we go? We go to paradise. That's what Jesus calls it. The word paradise here is translated in the Greek version of the Old Testament as Eden. As in the Garden of Eden. It's the perfect place that God created for humanity to live, but that was lost in the fall. Eden represents many things in the scriptures, but at its core, it is the place where God's presence dwelt with his people. And that fellowship with God was lost in the fall, but is regained in Jesus. That's the image that is at the heart of this promise that Jesus ultimately gives to this thief, and indeed to all who will trust in him. When we die, we will be with him in his perfect presence, and the psalmist assures us in his presence is fullness of joy. There's lots of questions about what will heaven be like, and the Bible tells us some things about what heaven will be like, but it can be hard for us to fully grasp and imagine. But whatever other things we want to discuss and debate about what heaven will be like, we know this for sure, that there we will be with Jesus, and in his presence is perfect and full joy. Murray Harris has written a little bit about these sayings of Jesus on the cross, and he says that's what's remarkable about Jesus' response to the thief, is that he gives him so much more than he asks for. Murray Harris says, while the thief requested to be merely remembered, Jesus promises an intimate personal association. While he asked for kindness at some unknown future time, Jesus gives him assurance that it will happen this very day. And while the thief asked about some vague kingdom, Jesus guarantees him a place in the paradise of God. Jesus gives the thief more than he asks for, and he often gives us more than we ask for today. So today, remember Jesus' gracious and generous response to this criminal on the cross who was saved by grace alone. Remember that God's grace in Jesus gives us more than we deserve, and often more mercy than we ask for as well. May that give you hope today. Be blessed.